All right, let's dive into a topic that's pretty loaded, to say the least. Conversion therapy.
Yeah, it's one of those things where as soon as you say it, people have strong opinions, lots of misinformation floating around.
It's true. So we're doing something a little different this time. We're laser focusing on just one source for this deep dive, a UK government report that really digs into the evidence around conversion therapy.
Exactly. It's a neutral, evidence-based report, which is what we need on a topic like this, right?
100%. No opinions, just the facts. So first things first. How does this report even define conversion therapy?
Well, they don't mince words. It's defined as any attempt to change a person's sexual orientation or their gender identity.
Okay, so it's broader than just like someone going to a therapist's office, right?
Absolutely. They actually use the terms SAEE, that stands for Sexual Orientation Change Efforts, and GICE, that's Gender Identity Change Efforts, to make it crystal clear that we're talking about at a setting.
Wow, so it could be like religious practices, family pressures, even societal expectations.
You hit the nail on the head. It's about recognizing that these pressures can be subtle, but still incredibly powerful.
So it's like, even if it's not outright abuse, if someone's trying to make you feel like you need to change who you are fundamentally, that's still conversion therapy.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is how the report highlights the more modern ways this stuff plays out. Forget the old school, brutal methods, right?
Yeah.
These days, it's sneakier. They dress it up in spiritual language, use pseudopsychological frameworks, even frame it as addiction recovery.
Sneaky is an understatement. It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing, really.
Perfect analogy.
So how do they actually do it? I mean, what does this disguised conversion therapy actually look like in practice?
So the report breaks it down into three main frameworks. But keep in mind, these aren't always separate, neat categories. There's the spiritual framework, the psychoanalytic framework, and the cognitive behavioral. Often they're blended together in really messed up ways.
Okay, so let's unpack these a bit, because I have a feeling this is where things get interesting. And by interesting, I mean potentially disturbing.
You're not wrong. Okay, let's start with the spiritual framework. Imagine being told that your same-sex attraction is like proof of demonic possession, something to be exercised through prayer or declarations of faith.
Wait, seriously, they still pull that demonic possession stuff?
It's more common than you'd think. The report even mentions therapists blaming same-sex attraction on a bad father-son relationship, or, yeah, you guessed it, demonic forces.
That's just awful. What about the psychoanalytic angle? That one sounds complicated.
It is. It's like they take trauma exploration, which, in the right hands, can be helpful. But instead of actual healing, they use it to imply that the trauma caused your sexual orientation or gender identity.
So it's basically blaming the victim.
Pretty much. We're talking things like psychodrama, these intense father-son holding sessions to try and like force a bond, a ton of emphasis on rigid gender roles. It's all about cramming someone back into a box they don't belong in.
It's like saying, if we can just find the trauma that made you this way, we can fix you. Just, Jackie Yuka's so messed up.
And completely ignores the fact that there's nothing to fix in the first place.
Right. Okay, so we've got the spiritual stuff, the psychoanalytic stuff. What about cognitive behavioral? That sounds almost legit, like something you'd encounter in regular therapy.
And that's precisely why it's so insidious. They borrow techniques from legitimate therapy, but twist them to fit this harmful agenda. Like, imagine being told your same-sex attractions are an addiction.
Oh, wow, I see where you're going with this. Using the whole addiction and recovery language to control behavior.
Exactly. They'll do things like trigger avoidance, so avoiding anything that might set you off, thought reframing, where they try to make you reinterpret your feelings. And then there are these accountability groups that sound like support, but are all about suppressing who you are.
So it's all about control and shame, really. Instead of helping someone accept themselves, they're trying to force them into this mold that doesn't fit.
You got it. And here's the kicker. It doesn't even work.
Okay, so we've established this whole conversion therapy thing is like a chameleon changing its colors to blend in. But just how big of a problem are we talking about here? Is this like a small fringe group doing this, or is it more widespread?
That is, unfortunately, the million-dollar question. Because one of the things the report is really upfront about is the lack of good data on just how many people are actually subjected to this stuff.
Yeah, I can imagine it's not exactly a conversation starter, right? Hey, have you ever been pressured to change your sexual orientation or gender identity? Kind of hard to get reliable numbers on that.
Exactly. The stigma is huge E, both around conversion therapy itself and D being LGBTQ++, which makes it really tough to research.
Like trying to nail jelly to a wall, probably. But the report must have found something, right?
Well, they did pull some stats from the 2017 UK National LGBT Survey that found 2% of respondents had actually undergone conversion therapy, and a further 5% had been offered it.
Okay, so hold on. Let's put that in perspective for our listeners. We're talking 1 in 50 people you might pass on the street have gone through this, and 1 in 20 have at least been offered it. Those numbers might not sound huge, but that's a lot of people being harmed.
It is, and remember, that's likely just the tip of the iceberg, right?
Uh-huh.
Because of everything we just talked about, how hidden this all is.
Right, right. So any insights into WHO is most at risk? Does the report say anything about who's most likely to be targeted?
One thing that was particularly worrying was the finding that transgender people might actually be more likely to experience this than, say, cisgender, lesbian, gay, or bisexual people.
Any theories on why that is?
Probably a combination of factors, but the biggest one is probably the increased stigma and discrimination trans folks face. It's still so misunderstood, and some people have this idea that being transgender is a choice, something you could be pressured or therapized out of.
So they're fighting these battles on multiple fronts, just for being who they are. The report does go into some of the factors that might make someone susceptible to this, and it's not as simple as you might think.
It's rarely one thing, right? It's usually this perfect storm. Religion is a big one, though, particularly within conservative branches. The report has tons of accounts of people feeling immense pressure to change because they're being told it goes against their faith.
Oh man, I can only imagine that internal conflict. Trying to reconcile who you are with what you believe must be incredibly painful.
Absolutely. And then you layer on top of that this really human desire to belong, to be accepted by your family, your community, even just in the eyes of God. People turn to conversion therapy because they're desperate to fit in, to be seen as normal.
And that desperation, sadly, makes them easy prey for coercion and manipulation, which, let's be honest, often comes from the people they trust most. Parents, faith leaders, even therapists sometimes. Didn't the report find that a lot of people are pressured, subtly or not so subtly, into doing this?
Yeah, there's one quote that really stuck with me. Someone talking about feeling like a total outcast in their community. That sense of isolation drove them to conversion therapy, hoping it would help them finally belong.
Oh, it's heartbreaking. Someone feeling so alone and desperate for acceptance that they'd subject themselves to something so harmful. Which brings us to the million-dollar question, really. Does it even work? Can you actually change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity?
Nope. Not in Medshell, not with a magic wand, not with any of this.
The UK government report's conclusion is crystal clear on this, folks. There is no scientifically valid evidence that you can change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity through conversion therapy.
And they didn't just say that lightly. They really went through all these studies that have been put forward as proof and found flaws in all of them.
Flaws? Like what? Lay it on us.
We're talking basic methodological errors, no control groups to compare against, relying on self-reporting, which is notoriously unreliable.
Especially when you're dealing with something as intensely personal and potentially traumatic as this, right? People will say what they think they should say.
Exactly. They might say they've changed because they're scared of the consequences if they don't, or because they think that's what everyone wants to hear. Doesn't mean it's true.
It's like building a house on sand. Might look okay from a distance, but one good storm and it's gone.
Perfect analogy. The report actually gives this great example. They analyzed what's considered the biggest survey ever done on conversion therapy. Even that study, which some people point to as proof that it works, found that only 0.1% of people reported a complete change.
0.1%? That's a rounding error. You wouldn't trust your life savings to a 0.1% chance, would you?
Exactly. And get this, most of the changes they did report weren't even about their actual attractions.
Yeah.
Just behaviors, like avoiding certain situations or suppressing stuff, which, as we know, doesn't change who you are.
It's putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Maybe hides the problem for a minute, but doesn't do anything to actually heal it.
Exactly. And even those tiny temporary changes often have a huge cost.
Because you can't just repress a core part of who you are without some serious consequences, right?
Right. A lot of the qualitative stuff in the report suggests these changes don't last, and they often lead to people feeling incredibly conflicted, blaming themselves, feeling broken.
There's this one quote that just sends chills down my spine. Someone saying they thought it was their fault for not being fixed by the therapy. Like they were the failure. It just shows how insidious this all is.
It really does. They prey on your vulnerabilities, your desire to be loved and accepted, and then when it doesn't work, they blame you in fault. It's just cruel.
Yeah.
And that takes us to something really important we have to talk about, which is the human cost of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because saying it doesn't work is one thing, but there are very real people whose lives are shattered by this.
It's one thing to talk about it in this, like, detached, analytical way, but we have to remember that these are actual human beings going through something incredibly damaging.
Yeah, it's like you said, not just an intellectual exercise, right?
Right.
These are real lives we're talking about.
Absolutely. And the report really lays out, in black and white, how damaging this can be to mental health. Increased depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, even self-harm. It's all in there.
And I think it's important to remind everyone listening, these aren't just risks listed in some report, right? These are the lived experiences of people who've been through this. It's like you're already questioning who you are, trying to accept yourself, and then they hit you with this message that you're broken, that something's fundamentally wrong with you.
And think about what that does to your self-esteem. It's no surprise that the report found a link between conversion therapy and, like, internalized homophobia and transphobia. You end up hating a part of yourself just to try and fit in, to be loved. Ugh, it's just heartbreaking. And then, as if that wasn't bad enough, you've got the potential for social isolation on top of it. Damaged family relationships, even people losing their faith over this. It's like this ripple effect of awfulness.
There's this one story in the report that really got to me about someone who actually became suicidal because of conversion therapy. It just shows you how high the stakes are here. This isn't some theoretical debate. We're talking about people's lives.
It really underscores how much words matter. When you use them to tell someone they're not good enough, that they need to be fixed, it can have devastating consequences.
And it goes beyond just individual harm, too. One of the things the report points out is how this all feeds into that bigger problem of societal stigma. Like, conversion therapy basically reinforces the idea that being LGBTQ+ is wrong, something to be ashamed of,
Right.
which just perpetuates this cycle of discrimination.
Yeah, it's like throwing gasoline on a fire. But I don't want to leave people feeling totally depressed. Because the report does talk about solutions, and while it's an uphill battle, there is hope. They go into some detail about how the world is trying to put a stop to conversion therapy, and there are some bright spots.
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing this global push to ban this stuff outright. The report talks about different legal strategies, bans, regulations to stop healthcare professionals from doing it, laws to protect children. It's happening.
So, like, actually making it illegal and holding people accountable.
Exactly. And it's not just about punishment. It's about sending a message saying this is wrong, this is harmful, and LGBTQ+ rights are human rights.
It's about changing the whole conversation. But laws are just one piece of the puzzle. What about, like, on the ground, what can people do about this?
Talk about it. That's what the report really emphasizes. Education, awareness, share what you learned from this deep dive. Tell your friends and family. Knowledge is power, and the more people understand about this, the less power it has.
Love it. Break the silence. And more importantly, listen to survivors. Their voices are so powerful in this fight.
Absolutely. And for anyone listening who might be struggling with their own sexual orientation or gender identity, please know you're not alone. There's help out there. There are resources, people who understand and want to support you.
Exactly. Being able to connect with people who get it makes all the difference.
And to anyone who thinks this doesn't affect them, that it's not their fight, I'd urge you to reconsider. This is a human rights issue, plain and simple. We all have a role to play in creating a world where everyone feels safe and supported to be who they are.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Whether it's speaking out against discrimination, supporting organizations, or just educating yourself and the people around you, every little bit helps.
That's what I hope people take away from this. It's an uphill battle, but we can all be part of the solution.
We can choose love over hate, acceptance over fear. We can choose to create a world where everyone is free to live their truth. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. And until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.